again so much for coming to All About Cider.
See how it plays out.
Yeah.
A panel discussion from the best cider people that I knew how to get a hold of, and I think they're the best ones in the country. But yeah, my name's Trey, this is Jerry, thanks for coming. I'm going to turn things over to Josh Noel. He's the beverage and travel writer at the Chicago Tribune, and he's a real good guy. And I'm going to hand things over to him. Here you go, Josh.
Thanks, Trey. Thank you. My name is Josh Noel. I write about travel and beer and cider and spirits. Oh, come on up, everybody. If you're on the panel, just come on up. And while they're coming up, I'll put in a plug for my other project I'm working on. I'm writing a book about Goose Island. It's, as I describe it, the history of craft beer through the lens of Goose Island. From the beginning up through the sale to Anheuser-Busch and then all the industry changes since then. That'll be out next year, so a while for that. Here's some cider guys. Hi, cider guys. Cheers. Got a big panel. I guess we're going to have to share some microphones, but we'll make do. Probably, Greg doesn't need a mic. Probably, I think hand-holding the mic might work best. So maybe just pass the mics around, or we'll figure it out. Yes?
We're recording.
We're recording, so we're going to pass the mics around. So thanks for coming. We're going to talk about cider. Actually, Trey, can you turn that light down a little bit? That's nice. We're going to talk about cider. We want to have a free-flowing discussion. You guys should feel free to jump in and, you know, if you have something to say, say it. If you want to ask a question of each other, please do. We'd love to hear some questions from you guys at the end of the program here this evening. So let's start in the obvious place, which is everyone here this is actually an all-star cider lineup right here of the Chicago area. Everyone, please introduce yourself. Tell us what business you're with, and then just a short few sentences about sort of your approach to what you do. What distinguishes your cider company or bar from what else is happening in the industry right now?
Thanks, Josh. My name is Greg Hall. I founded Bertsche Cider in Fenville, Michigan back in 2011. And we started our production fall of that year, released it first in the market here in Chicago in 2012. So we make all our cider up in Michigan with Michigan apples from the cider coast. We love being up there. We think it's got some of the best fruit in the country, if not the world. All of our ciders then cease and barrel, so whether 5% or 75%, they all do some barrel aging in American oak or French oak or bourbon barrel. And all made right up in Fenville, and then we send them down here to Chicago, right down the road to Goose Island, and they're now packaging our cider for us. So right now we've got 2 ciders on tap at the bar. We have Percheron, which is our kind of our French Norman style farm cider. It's fermented. That's fermented with native yeast, and then aged in French oak with some bread, and then back sweetened with juice from the next year. We also have the Mitten on tap, which is our bourbon barrel aged cider. So that's aged for about a year in bourbon barrels, and then again back sweetened with some fresh pressed Michigan apple juice. So that's what we got here, and I'm excited to be here with such an illustrious gang of cider veterans. I'm the new guy here.
Thanks. My name is Brian Rutzen. I'm with the Northman Cider Bar. We just opened up this week. I recognize the faces who stopped in, so thank you guys. We're really, glad to be a part of the scene here in Chicago. I've been in the cider game for a couple of years, and thanks to a lot of the support and energies and activities of the people on the stage. I think if I had a philosophy, it's, you know, we say the illustrious cider panel up here. The cool thing about cider is, I mean, we take what we do very seriously, every one of us, in whatever aspect and the passion that we bring to what we do. But cider culture is not wine culture. Yes, it's made like wine, and there are amazing deep flavors that are going on, and we can all sit around and raise a glass and appreciate what's happening, the qualities of it, but it's not wine culture. Cider culture is working class culture, it's farm culture, it's meant to connect. So I think what's really exciting is getting people back into what was a very American drink and bringing it back to a modern era and a modern age and a relevance. So it's exciting to be a part of it. It's exciting to see it happen right here before our eyes in Chicago. So, cool.
Well, thank you. Bertsche, Prima Cider.
Sorry.
Okay. Amateur hour here. But no, we've been making cider commercially since 2011. Started making cider in 1980 for friends and family. We take a little different approach. Ours are dry ciders. We only do what the apple does and the yeast does. They're aged for long periods of time in a cold cellar, and so it's and you know we would like to have cider that reflects the apple only. So thank you.
Can I use both? My name is Paul Vander Heide. I started Vandermill Ciders with my wife back in 2006. Originally, we were starting a cider mill, so sweet cider, donuts, fall-friendly, family-friendly type of business, and started fermenting cider when we first started then in 2006, and then got our license in 2008. I started selling cider to the Chicago market in, I think it was summer of 2011. We were able to self-distribute to the city, so I got to drive it down in my family minivan and drop it off at various bars and restaurants. Since then, we've had a wonderful experience of growth in our business and have continued to invest in our company, and have been fortunate enough to be a part of the cider scene in Chicago here, which, by the way, is tenfold above any other market in the Midwest and beyond that. So that's thanks to everybody here and around that's really embracing the category. Philosophy of cider, I mean, when I first started selling cider, it was pretty much big brands that were on the market, and we were trying to differentiate ourselves. So the approach that we take to making our ciders is to represent the fruit that we grow in Michigan. Fruit in Michigan is very, very acidic. It's fruit forward, it's fresh. Most all of the apples are grown for the grocery stores and culinary fruit. So we want to highlight the elements of the apple that we have in the fruit that we have available. And then we do a lot of other experimentation with different flavors, adding back to the cider different things to provide people with, and ourselves, with interesting things to drink. So we have kind of our core lineup of ciders that you're probably familiar with. It's what we sell the most of. And then we also have kind of a heritage series. Right now we have Chapman's Blend on draft here, which is more of our American heritage variety type apple cider. It's dry, acidic, fruit forward. And then we do a line of Ciders, which is cider fermented with honey. And then we do quite a different number of barrel aging processes with that as well. And like to collaborate with our brewery friends to make those products. So we're trying to help show the very, very wide world of cider that's available, and it goes well beyond what everyone here is producing as well. You look around the world and everyone has their take on it. So we hope to continue to be a part of expanding people's viewpoint on what the world of cider can be. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Michelle Foik. I represent and I'm one of the co-founders of Eris Brewery and Cider House. If you are looking at me like you've never heard of this before, it might be because we're not established yet. We are in the process of working with Chicago permitting in the city of buildings. So we are about 5 months into getting our permits and we're still waiting. So I think the Northman out of anybody knows exactly what we're going through at this point. But I think the running joke with everybody here today was, Michelle, so do we get to try your cider today? Very funny. We're not going to open until like 2017, so that's not going to happen. But the reason why I got involved in cider and chose to do a brewery and a cider house in Chicago is because of my involvement with the cider industry. I come from a brewery background. I worked for Goose Island and Revolution Brewing, and then I had an opportunity to work for about a year with Bertsche Cider. And I cannot tell you the excitement that this industry has, the growth that we've been seeing. I've been very, very lucky to also work with CiderCon. I do logistics on that end for this large conference that we do for cider makers and industry enthusiasts and marketing, sales, and all that. And my connections have been amazing. So I think the big thing that Eris wants to do and be is really an educational source for people to understand cider and understand beer too, because we'll be doing beer too. But let's talk about cider. It's really the educational aspects. I mean, every one of these cider makers has a method and a theory of how they want their fruit to be reflected in their cider. I have the opportunity to have fun and reflect different people's theories, showcase their ciders, and also my own. So being the first type of producing hub in the city is very, very exciting for me. So, and I hope it's something that really, in the city of Chicago, gets embraced, just like Paul said. It's a lot of the educational parts of it, and that's what my strengths are, is educating people about the cider industry. So I think that's how we're going to represent it at Eris.
Cool.
2 years, Michelle. 2 years.
Sorry, 3 years at Bertsche.
So one of the cider makers, let's just start on the ground level. How is cider made exactly? We know there's apples. We know there's yeast. What's the process? What happens?
Well, you know,
Wait, really quick. First of all, those are the two only ingredients, technically, right?
sometimes there's not even yeast. Sometimes you just press the apples and let it go. So like in Normandy, to make an AOC cider in Normandy, you're not allowed to add yeast. You have to use the native yeast that's on the fruit. So a lot of us who are used to the brewing process, you have to add yeast to beer because you go through the hot side and you sterilize it. With cider, if you're doing it kind of the natural way, you are pressing apples, there's no heating involved. So the fruit, even if you rinse it, it's not going to be sterile. So the microflora that rides in on the fruit can ferment it all the way down if you choose to do it that way.
Have you done that, Craig?
Yeah, we do that. Percheron, the Percheron that we've got on tap here is fermented with all wild yeast. So we do that with a few of our ciders, it's kind of a fun way to do it. We do it with all of our Orchard Series ciders. So our Orchard Series ciders, I said before that all of our ciders see some time in wood. The exception is our Orchard Series. That's just whatever comes out of the orchard. So it's straight apples, pressed, unfined, unfiltered. We just let it ferment out by itself, and then after 6 to 18 months, it's ready to go.
So what about more typically? Does it happen in stainless steel? Do you press the apples and then add yeast? Rich?
Well, typically, for us, primary fermentation takes place in 1 to 2 weeks. The yeast needs temperature. After that point, most of the alcohol is the sugars turn to alcohol. Then we actually rack it, and then it's the slow aging process where in our case, the ciders develop in colder temperature. Winter's a great time for us because cider's it's got less alcohol than wine. It needs high acidity, pH, and cold temperature, and then you don't have many problems, and you don't have to intervene. Ciders, in my view, it's kind of like the illegitimate child of wine that has been adopted by beer people. Sorry. And so anyway, for us, it's kind of a slow process. I like stainless because it doesn't alter the fruit flavor. We do some barrel aging, and it does add some nice, depending on the type of barrel. But for us, it's kind of a slow process. When we do a champagne cider, there we let the cider ferment till it's dry, and then it goes through a secondary fermentation. And usually that's a 2 to 3 year process before it's released, and you can really tell the difference.
Paul, what's the process for you?
We ferment most of the volume of our product in stainless, and we are inoculating.
You press apples and put juice in?
Correct. So it's fresh apple juice, and then we are adding a white wine yeast that we use. We have typically probably about a 14-day fermentation process. To your point, most of the sugars are consumed in that amount of time. As far as temperature is concerned, we're going where that yeast is the happiest. The one thing about culinary fruit, which very much differs from a lot of the European fruit, which has a much bigger tannin structure, is that tannin structure tends to be far more resistant to bacteria and other types of fermentation that you may not want or that we may not want in our cider. I had a discussion over CiderCon with a friend of ours, Bill Bradshaw from England, and they talk about how they can take juice and put it in a plastic tote, set it outside, and 6 months later they come back. It's delicious because they've got a great tannin-rich fruit over there, which is resistant to a lot of things that we don't want. Most of the culinary fruit in the U.S. is highly acidic, but doesn't have that backbone of tannin structure. So what we've found is that if we let it go too long, or if we let it be so-called too natural, then we'll have off flavors and aromas that we don't want, or that we can't make consistent for the ciders that we're producing. So over the last 2 to 3 years, we've been very much focused on the products that we're putting out to the public. We want them to be, people largely expect them to taste the same way when they drink it once, and then when they go back to try it again because they like it. And that has kind of pushed us into a mode of operation where we ferment as clean as what we can over that first 2 weeks, and then after that it's a process of stabilization, whether that's filtration. Sulfites is a very common thing used in the wine world, and that's largely just to knock down some of those unintended flavors and aromas that we don't want in most of the ciders that we produce.
I feel like a lot of your ciders to this point that you've released have been on the sweeter side. Is that fair to say? Would you say?
Well, it's funny you ask that, because when I first started producing cider, we were adding sweetness back to about 3%. And at that time, when we were selling against the 1 or 2 big brands that were in the market,
that was very dry, even at that point.
It was a very dry product, and it was very acidic and dry. And since then, as the cider market has developed, most people's palate has moved continually drier. So we can, over time, have dropped that to where our ciders are the sweetest of which I think is 1.5%, which I know might be a difficult relative thing for people to grasp. And what I like to tell people is, for me, I love meeting a beer drinker that loves an IPA or a porter or a pale ale, and then they drink our cider and they say, well, that's too sweet. And I say, aha, we have a lot less residual sugar than that beer does, because the beer has unfermentable sugars from the malt, and if your sugar is a measurable thing in liquid. So because it's fruit, I think people's perception is that it tends to be sweeter, but out of most common beer styles that you have, the ciders, certainly that everyone up here is producing, and ours as well, are technically quite a bit drier. And that seems to be the right way where people are moving to. So.
Well, what I'm working toward is that I detect a big difference between, I like both of your ciders a lot, but I think they have very different characteristics. How do you get that little extra sweetness out of yours, Paul?
We use beet sugar, and the reason we do that in lieu of, say, juice is for two reasons. One is that we don't want to dilute the product. So again, part of what we have always been able to sell on is that the natural sugars in a cider tend to ferment to 6.5% or so, give or take. People like that, and we didn't want to kind of dilute that product down from an alcohol standpoint. And then also adding sugar, whether it's through juice or any other type of sweetness, in my opinion anyway, ends up bringing back some apple character. If you taste a completely dry cider, a lot of times, especially with the fruit that we're using, it can be not as fruity as what you might think, and a little bit of sweetness tends to bring the apple back.
I mean, none of us would put a steak on the grill without salt, right? The salt is doing something to the meat that allows various flavors to emerge. Similarly, sugar helps bring flavor forward in fruit. It's not the enemy. Relying on sugar is lazy, but using sugar smartly is smart.
I think another thing that maybe the audience doesn't understand is that when we use the word sweet, we all cringe. I don't think the audience thinks that way. I have a huge problem within our industry when someone says, oh, it's a sweet cider. Because in our industry, a sweet cider is a connotation to certain types of ciders. Whereas an audience here, I mean, if you were to raise your hands and tell me that you like a slightly sweeter or more drier, I just feel that the word sweet really needs to be defined. And as a cider industry, we should define the word sweet. Because I think, Paul, you did a good job just now saying sweet, well, mine's not sweet, it's the sugars that we add. So I don't think the same word in definition to a cider industry person is sweet compared to what the general audience is.
So I'm a big tent guy, and I think that, all cider is good because, number one, it's all made with apples, and all apples come from trees. And even if there are trees in China or, Eastern Europe, there's still trees. And it's hard to look at a tree and say, you're a bad tree. Trees are pretty awesome. So in that way, all ciders are good. And just like beer, let's
be honest. I mean, some ciders taste like chemicals, right? I don't think anyone's here on the stage do. But
Jolly Rancher is a very common industry description of that.
Sure, and this is a crowd. This is a craft beer crowd. It's a craft beer place. It's a craft beer neighborhood. 89% of beer drinkers don't drink craft beer. They drink light American lager, and it's probably something like 98% of cider drinkers drink sweet cider that tastes like Jolly Ranchers. So does that mean they're like jerks or bad guys because they do that? No, it's still made from apples. So I think there's what's cool, and what we're finding is there's this huge range of cider. Was anybody at the Cider Summit in Navy Pier? Show of hands. Couple, put your hand up. You won't get in trouble. It's high in the air. Yeah, so the cider summer was great. We had, Michelle, how many ciders were there?
Well, a couple hundred ciders, about 60 some odd, 70 producers, 60 producers.
Oh, no, about 100 producers.
Was it?
Yeah, it was really large this year.
Yeah, so there's over a couple hundred ciders.
4,000 people attended.
Yeah.
4,000 people attended.
And, you know, I think you don't have to be an expert to line them up and be able to tell the difference from one to the other. And I think, you know, 5 years ago, you talk to a lot of drinkers, even a lot of people in this room, and you'd say, what do you think of cider? And it's like, it's all kind of like sweet. There's like one kind of cider. I was actually like that back in the year 2000, before I went over to England and wandered into a cider festival in a pub up in Yorkshire. I kind of thought, you know, all the ciders were all kind of the same. Just like, you know, back in the 70s and 80s, people thought there were three kinds of beer. There was, you know, light beer, there was beer, light beer, and import beer. And those are the three kinds. Well, I think cider's going through the same kind of thing where, you know, there's a lot of different styles. There's no one right way to make cider or wrong way to make cider. You know, the great thing is there is, you know, just up on stage, we've got guys who are doing very traditional kind of dry fruit-forward ciders. We got a guy who's doing a lot of very innovative flavored ciders. And then, you know, we're doing very, very traditional kind of European style ciders with some barrel note. And I think no one's going to confuse the three of our ciders. They'll taste very different. And that's what's great. That's what's going to really make the cider industry start to take off. You know, if Brian couldn't open a cider pub if there were 18 cider taps that all tasted the same, that'd be super boring.
Yeah.
That'd be like a bar that had like 10 IPAs on tap.
Exactly. People are skeptical still. And when they say, how are you going to have 18 drafts on? You're going to get them.
People are skeptical of the idea of a cider bar still?
Yeah, still. I mean, even though Seattle has several, Portland has several cider bars. New York has one and a half. And they're popping up in places like Fort Collins, Colorado. North Carolina's going to be getting some. I mean, Milwaukee's getting one really soon. Chicago's going to get another one here soon. I mean, we are not. It's not like we. Grand Rapids, yeah. At the new cider house.
I think it's important to recognize also that, you know, this category, especially in this city, has evolved, in my opinion, very quickly. The product that we have on draft here, which is like, you know, like a lot of these guys with zero sweetness, back in 2008 and 2009, I couldn't get anybody to drink a product like that because it was so far different from what people were used to. And there's a reason that a lot of the big brands end up with starting out with a sweet forward cider. The American palate is a sweet palate. So we're all doing, I think, you know, our best to try to say, hey, a lot of that sweetness can cover up what is, you know, the essence of the apple. But you have to get people there somehow. And that might take, and is taking, a wide variety of different kinds of cider in order to bring people into the world that, you know, we kind of live in of what typically is a lot of dry cider.
So Rich, I wanted to dig into your approach a little bit because it's you said at the start that it's, you sort of let the apple, forget your exact words, sort of you go where the apple takes you. So you don't add any adjuncts at all?
We don't add adjuncts. We don't filter our ciders. They basically naturally clarify if you wait long enough. You know, to an earlier point, I mean, there's a certain style of cider that comes out of England and a slightly different version of that out of France, out of Normandy, Brittany. And those apples tend to have more tannin, and they've got a long history of you know, nurturing their cider culture. You get down to Spain. Spain doesn't have high tannin apples. Those are high acetic apples. They rely on a different fermentation technique, which kind of gives it the that sourness that some people strive for. You get in other parts of Europe, basically they're fermenting with fruits similar to the U.S. And I think what you're finding in the U.S. is that, tastes are evolving. And this is a horrible example, but I think I have enough gray hair up here to use this. I mean, when I was in college, my friends were drinking Tyrolia. Okay,
College back then?
Yeah, they did. It was very elite universities back then. And so you meet these guys now, and they're all drinking $50 cats. I mean, I think to a point, some people, it's like evolving from Velveeta to a real fine Burgundy cheese or something like that. And I think as your tastes evolve, you're going to tend to move more towards a drier cider. There's some terminology issues that, we'd have to borrow from wine, but I mean, some people like an off-dry wine. Okay, it's not totally sweet, but it's got residual sugar to the amount that you were alluding to.
There's been a kind of a flavor pathway that I think a lot of Americans have gone on, and we see that very much today, where everybody kind of starts with very simple flavors, and then they discover that the simple flavors aren't cool, and whether it's their own palate matures or they get some peer pressure, they go from simple to intense, and they want the most intensity possible. And that's with beer.
Thank you very much, Bourbon County Stout.
Yeah, beer, cocktails. They put sriracha on everything. And then kind of the next level is to go to complexity. And I think for a long time, when there was beer and wine, and that was about it, beer lost the mature drinkers to wine because wine was more complex. And people wanted to just enjoy the wine with their meal and not necessarily slug back 35 of them in a night. And I think cider has all those things. There are ciders that are nice and crisp and refreshing, and there are ciders that are a little more intense, whether because they're flavored or they're high tannin or super funky. And then there's ciders that are really complex, and as complex as the finest Belgian ales or fine wines. And so I think cider is cider's ahead of where the market is, because we're already making all these different ciders. And what's going to be fun is having people kind of explore them. And now that Northman's finally open.
Yeah, let's just cut to it. Ryan, what took so long?
Oh, it's a very boring story. I mean, really, there's nothing to tell. We opened as soon as we were ready. We were really close. It's a lot harder than it seems. The first year was wasted. Everyone says, we've been waiting for 2 years. We never said we were going to open 2 years ago. We announced 2 years ago. But we put out some false expectations as to our own ambitions and realized that after the first year, we were still at stage one. We basically redesigned 3 times in the first year. Trying to incorporate, I don't know if you guys remember Jury's, the old bar there in Lincoln, which is now where, Spaces, we're really happy to be in that space and that history. He came in before we opened, just peeking his head in, and we gave him the grand tour because we feel like a debt of gratitude to that bar in that neighborhood for so long being a fixture. But the space presents challenges, and we were gonna, if you remember the back patio he had, we were gonna enclose that and create that as part of the restaurant. And then we found out we couldn't, and so we had to start over. And then when we started over, it came in, where we didn't want it budget-wise, and so we had to start over again. And so it's, again, a very boring story, but we basically got started a year ago, and then it takes about a year to put it all together.
I'll totally comment on that. I mean, from the day that I started the project in my head, to a talk to somebody, to then looking for locations. I mean, we did a whole year before we bought the building, just to look around the building to make sure that I can do legally in the state of Illinois the things that I wanted to do. I had to talk to the ILCC and make sure that the licensing for liquor.
No one has been allowed to do what you're going to do.
I agree with you. That's very
You
true.
will be the first in
I am going to be
Illinois.
the first. I am
Eris
going to be the
Brewery
first.
will be the first.
We're going to be the first in the state of Illinois, at least. There's one other place that I know of. I know Paul's just begging to get this microphone because he's also expanding in Grand Rapids. But
You're going to be the first what, Michelle?
I'm sorry, a brew house, a brewery and cider house
And you're
under
located.
one roof.
You're located where?
4240 Irving Park Road. No, I'm just kidding. Old Irving Park area, that neighborhood there, right by
Opening
the
in
highway.
2017.
Smoke.
In 2017, I hope. But see, this is the thing. I shouldn't even bring that up because I've learned from the Northman not to say a damn thing.
I want to ask you guys one more ingredient question. Is everyone here making cider basically with the same apples, or is there a huge range in terms of the apples you're using? Talk a little bit about apple type and how that factors into the cider you make.
First question I always get asked is, what kind of apples do you use? And I always answer the same way, and I say Michigan apples. And that's not what they expect the answer to be. They expect me to name varieties that they're used to seeing at the grocery store. So we don't typically use those varieties. We use other varieties, things like a lot of Northern Spy and Macintosh and Wine Sap and Heide Red, and then when we can get them, all sorts of different varieties.
Are those apples you just named things that we would want to eat, or do they not taste good?
Most apples taste pretty good. We don't, they all taste good to me.
So what?
Greg, come on. Your palate is completely different than the rest of us.
I think
Okay, this guy made me once eat a Brahms stout. Now that's a cider apple. I couldn't taste anything for 3 hours. It dried up my entire mouth. So when he says apples all taste the same to him or taste good to him, there's such a false to that.
Well, there aren't a lot of brown, there's not a lot of, so the English, let's bring this back to apples for a second. So the English, about 100 years ago, categorized apples into 4 categories, right? Dessert apples, so sweets, tarts, bitter sweets, and bitter tarts. So the bitter sweets and the bitter tarts are all high tannin, and there are things that if you've ever bitten into a crab apple, or maybe sucked on a Lipton tea bag, that's kind of what it's like. They're really, 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 really full of tannin. And they're not considered to be edible. But both sweets and sharps are edible. And in Michigan, the only bitter sweets we have are hobby orchard stuff, or probably stuff, Paul put in the ground, a year ago. So there's just not a lot of bitter sweets and bitter sharps in the ground. And our first couple of years at Bertsche, we bought a lot of bitter sharps from another cider maker in a different part of the country. And we made cider with those apples, and we thought it was great. And it was, of all the ciders we made, it was kind of the least popular cider. So it was very traditional, but it's not what people wanted. And we're like, okay, we want to really focus on Michigan fruit. And Michigan fruit, as Paul said, is kind of really high acid fruit, super tart. And for me that works because a lot of the ciders I really like in Somerset, in Normandy, and certainly in Asturias are super tart ciders. So I think it works.
So that's largely what you're working with then? So it's not a huge range of apple profile?
We probably use 50 to 70 apple varieties a year, but it's not like making a batch of beer where we have a recipe with X amount of apple varieties. We kind of press what comes in and then decide where it wants to go. So it's much less process driven and much more kind of apples and then blending driven at the end.
In Michigan, the varieties that Greg mentioned, Northern Spy and Wine Sap, and, these are apples that were originally grown for fresh product. They've fallen out of favor because you've got all these hybrid varieties, Honeycrisp, that are super juicy and super sweet, and a lot of the growers have gone towards that. But it has been an incredibly long time since a grower has grown fruit specifically for cider. So maybe people remember, their grandma's apple pie used to always be made with Northern Spy. I mean, so these are apples that we've been using, and we do that because they're really great apples and they bring something more than what some of the new club varieties bring to the table. And as a group of Midwest and certainly in Michigan, what we're aiming to do as a group of cider makers is to say, hey, there's some qualities in the fruit that you're growing right now, and there isn't a grocery store anywhere that wants a Northern Spy anymore. And so you're selling it all to an applesauce plant or to a peeler plant to make sliced apples. We actually like some of the characteristics in that fruit, and we will buy them, so please don't push them out of the ground. And what you're seeing right now, and especially after the 2012 crop loss in Michigan, is that the varieties of apples that you see in the supermarket are getting narrower and narrower and narrower because the supermarket recognizes that they don't need to have 10 different varieties of apples on the shelf anymore, because if someone's going to bite into it or they're going to give it to their kid for lunch, they want it to be sweet and acidic and delicious. So, and crisp. So it's a big challenge for us to try to convince these growers to say, hey, we realize you make a lot of money selling for the fresh market, but there's another market here in hard cider, and we're looking for products that are a little bit different. And we think that with different methodologies of growing, that you can make this an economically viable growing type of variety as well.
So just to be clear, you guys don't really use the apples at all that we see in the grocery store?
Sure we do. 99% of the apples grown in Michigan are apples that you would likely see or have already heard of as a variety. Some of those that Greg mentioned, they're out there, and they're out there in some pretty significant quantities, and we're taking those from the processors. But you cannot produce a whole lot of cider using all specific varieties without using things like Jonathan and...
I
disagree with me?
I do a little bit,
Yeah.
but they're
Where
hard
are
to
those?
find.
Because I don't see Cortland's, I don't see any of those.
Where are what?
Like those varieties. Like, I mean, when we're talking about what we see in the grocery stores, Fuji's, Honeycrisp, all those, most of those are coming from Washington. Maybe you get information
That's not
because you
true.
live in Michigan.
In Michigan,
But in Chicago,
Well, we just, what's available in Michigan, last year, we had 8% Tremblin's bitter in our cider. We had 11% Arkansas black. We had Gold Rush and Harrelson 11, Wixon Crab. We had a mixture of Boscov, Ashby, Northern Spy, Grimes Golden.
how many bins of those apple varieties do you have?
And we're a very small producer, and for a reason.
Right.
For a reason.
I think that to the point of the question with, relative to the rest of the beer world, we're a pretty small producer also, and there are just not the varieties available at what you would consider to be a economically viable sized business right now. It's really difficult.
Is there much competition amongst the cider makers for apples?
Absolutely.
Tell me.
I mean, where we get our apples, I have a good
Don't ask
relationship
Rich.
with my producer, and I'm also growing trees there. But regularly, he's approached by many to hey, can I buy fruit from you? So interesting. Where I get my trees from, he's kind of the. If you ask me, he's a little bit the Steve Woods of the Midwest. And that's Steve Wood. Huh? Yeah, well, but they're for different reasons. What I wanted to say though was that I think in the 80s, he realized that growing fruit commercially was really a bad business model for him. Plus, the grower had a lot of interest in doing heritage antique apples, whatever term you like to use, and so. But they're hard to find, and that might change in 5 to 10 years because there's a lot of interest in growing other cider apple varieties. The interesting point is, I don't think anybody in this room can say 5 years from now, a Kingston Black is going to taste like an English Kingston Black because their climate's different, the sun is different, we have a longer
Terroir is
fall.
real for
Yes,
apples.
for all we know, there's ciders the trees that are growing in the U.S. that really will make a great American cider.
Is I'm just hearing sort of echoes of buying apples, sort of akin to buying hops for brewers.
That actually came up earlier tonight when we talked about the hop shortage back in 07, 08, whatever that was, 09. Yeah, that's I think the key thing to remember here. Cider is an agricultural product. Really only one thing in beer is agricultural, and that's hops. Grain is a commodity. It's been so mass produced that it's easy for any brewer to look up in a catalog and order grain on demand. Because of the cyclical nature of apples, you really got to have relationships with your farmers. And that is what I think beer brewers woke up to when the hop shortage came about years ago.
Yeah, Greg, I'd like to hear from you on this as a longtime brewer, now apple guy.
Well, I think there's a couple things going on. As a brewer, certainly you're looking for, as a small brewer, most brewers are buying barley malt. They're buying a kind of a finish of the malt. They're not buying the barley. And then for hops, they're just buying a variety. And then when you finally get big enough to go out to Yakima and rub hops, and you're like, oh, I'm going to rub 60 bales of Cascades. You're like, oh, they're all different. Whoa, when you're a little brewer, you just kind of like call up your hop broker and order Cascades and expect them to be pretty much the same every time. And when you go out and when you get big enough and you get to buy them, of course you buy all the best ones. All the guys like Sierra and Anchor and Deschutes and now Goose, get to go out there first and buy all the good stuff, and then whatever's left over goes to everybody else. And I think that's a little bit the way with barley too. And I think with cider, I think it's going to be kind of like that. I'm not aware. I think we probably have tried to buy apples from some of the hobby farms that Rich uses and some of the other guys use. But Michigan's an 800 million pound market. We're not anywhere close to 1% of that yet. So I think there's plenty of apples out there for us to make good cider with. And I think one of the things you got to realize about apples too is that even if you're buying Northern Spy, if you're buying it from one farm and then there's another farm across the street and they also have Northern Spy, well maybe the first farm the trees are like 25 years old and the other farm the trees are like 70 years old, and maybe the first guy is like super natural or super cheap and doesn't really do anything at all to his orchard other than trim it. The other guy may have some animals, so he spreads some manure around. So by the time you get the fruit, even though they're both Northern Spies, they're completely different. And it's very much like the wine world that way. You can go into any decent wine store, and there's going to be 500 Pinot Noirs. They're all Pinot Noir, but they don't taste the same. Why is that? The fruit's different when you go kind of just across the street.
And that's what Rich was alluding to with the terroir about Kingston Black, the fame. You've heard Northern Spy several times. I hope you guys all go home knowing Northern Spy as a critical heirloom apple in American cider making. Kingston Black is a great English cider apple variety that the British love, and we now have cuttings, and it was all on the New England coast 20 years ago. Now we're getting cuttings into Michigan. The ones in New England don't grow the same as the ones in England, and the ones that grow in New England don't grow the same as what will grow in Michigan. So I think that was Rich's point, is that we're still figuring this out. Growers are still figuring this out. No one knows what to expect. The best time to plant an apple was 10 years ago. The next best time is today. So we're just now figuring out with this stuff coming in the ground that what impact will that have on the overall market?
Do you think that the cider industry and what we're drinking might look radically different in 10 years as a result of what you just said?
Yeah, it'll be taken over by really large producers that
Taken over?
A standard style cider. And I take issue with the term hobby farm. I mean, this guy's family, he's got 500 acres. His whole livelihood is based on that. And that's no different than going out you know, in the Cascades and finding somebody that grows hops that's unique to his area. And that's where we source our apples from. Very dedicated family, and you know, fine. Our cider, if you like it, great. If you don't, I'm sorry.
You know, let me back up to what my original comment was. You know, it's not even about so much about the apple varieties for us. You know, it's about the fact that they're grown in Michigan, because in Michigan, you know, we're on the coast. The west coast of Michigan gets about 40 inches of rain a year, or equivalent of with snow. If you look at the great cider regions of Europe, which are Normandy, Brittany, southwest England, Somerset, Wales, and then Asturias, and the Basque region of northern Spain, they're all coastal. They all get about 40 inches of rain a year. And if you talk to the apple growers over there, the guys who have been basically managing orchards for like 50 years, they'll tell you that apple trees, you know, that the variety is important, but it's not nearly as important as the tree. And the tree wants rain, because when the tree gets rain, what happens is the rain is sporadic. It might rain, like today, it might rain 1.5 inches, and it might not rain for 3 weeks. So that tree is going to do fine. Trees, if you haven't noticed, are fairly drought proof. You know, all the trees that are out there, you know, in this neighborhood or in the orchards of Michigan or in the forests of Michigan, you know, are anywhere from 5, 10, 15, 300 years old. So they're pretty much drought proof. They're designed to deal with low water. So what they do when there's low water is they have root systems that go a little deeper to pull more water in, and then they have trunks that are bigger so that they can hold more water in them. And then by going through that whole process, you get more complexity in the fruit, in the sugar that's in the fruit. There's more complexity in the flavor of an apple that's grown in a tree that's fed rainwater than a tree that's fed irrigated water. If you look at the Great Lakes, you know, both upstate Michigan and again, western Michigan, upstate New York and western Michigan, get about 40 inches of rain. The place that grows the most apples in America is the Yakima Valley out in Washington, which coincidentally also grows most of the hops. Anyone know how much rain they get a year?
Very little.
Get about 7 inches of rain, so it's kind of the high desert. But they've got all those Columbia River dams, so they irrigate, but basically the trees get the same amount of water every day, so the fruit is less complex. And we think being on the coast of western Michigan gives us an advantage of having more complex fruit, whether it's McIntosh or Northern Spy or Ida Red or Wine Sap or Golden Delicious or anything else. It's a little more complex because of where it's grown.
There's no other state that has a longer coastline in the country than Michigan. I mean, okay, maybe Alaska, but Alaska's barely, you know, America, right?
Not a lot of
Canada.
Not a lot of orchards.
Not a lot of orchards. No, but so Michigan has the largest coastline in the country. Not Florida, not Texas, not California. It's Michigan. So yeah, it has a huge impact on what's happening there.
I'm curious what you all think about the state of cider, for lack of a better word, cider culture, cider embrace in Chicago, and where we stack up nationally. And I'm also wondering what we were just getting our first cider bar. We have I don't think anyone's making cider in the city yet. You'll be the first, I believe, right? So that.
Rightby is in Lincolnwood. Lincolnwood is right over the border. And Beguile, Broken Nose, absolutely. And Long Grove, Prima, Long Grove, Illinois. There's several in Southern Illinois.
I'm talking in the city.
Right, me would be.
If you don't have 606 on your zip code, don't talk to Josh. Damn it.
Well, for the sake of this question, so where is Chicago cider culture right now? How open-minded is the city to cider? How much room for growth is there? And I don't know what cities have completely embraced cider. I'm going to just guess Portland, Oregon. But I'm curious, in those really progressive places, how different is the cider culture than what it is here?
So Portland is so progressive that, cider's already old. I mean, they have several cider bars there, and we just have, so every year, the cider conference is held here in Chicago. Except for this past year, it was held in Portland, Oregon in February. And so we got a chance to check out all these cider bars, and even with a couple thousand cider enthusiasts, a lot of the bars weren't very busy. There's more beer companies in Portland than there are in Chicago, and they don't even have 1 million people. So, and you still go in, and they think they're the height of beer culture. And maybe they are on the outskirts, but downtown Portland shuts down at 11 p.m. and 70% of their draft lines are IPAs. I look at what's happening in Chicago beer culture, and I'm blown away. When I look at what's happening in the cider culture, we're still eager and excited. They're all like, yeah, cider, it's cool.
If cider was a category of beer, if it was a beer style, do you know where it would rank amongst the craft beer styles? So IPA is number 1, wheat beer is number 2. You know number 3 is? Cider. Really? Yeah, it's bigger than seasonal now. Yep. So cider is growing very fast, and I believe it will continue to grow. And thanks to the variety of ciders being made, with the...
Well, let's get back to Chicago. I think it's safe to say craft beer in Chicago is doing some pretty incredible things right now. We've got some incredible producers. You walk into the average shitty sports bar, and they've got 6 beers you'd be perfectly happy to drink, whereas 10 years ago that was certainly not the case. So I'd say the embrace of craft beer is obviously pretty impressive here, but where are we with our embrace of cider?
I think Chicago proper, the city proper, is a fantastic place for cider. People are open and like to drink different things. I always use the analogy in the suburbs, you're like the prophet in the desert. You're preaching and nobody wants to listen. And if they do, it's candy sweet. It's horrible.
So, Greg can probably speak specifically to Portland, certainly better than I can. My experience, I was out there for a week over CiderCon here in February, and I was going to a place that is the supposed mecca of craft beer. 32% of all the liquid is craft beer, and it's the highest percentage of cider drinkers in the entire country, and the food is fantastic. And I can tell you that after the first 3 days, I was longing to be in this city because I didn't see cider pouring from every single bar. I did not,
You see that here?
God, there's so many friggin' bars here.
But there's at least one
we
line.
didn't even scratch the surface.
There's at least one line.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is I feel like most bars in Chicago have one line.
And I think
so,
places
but
like-
is that really an embrace of cider, or does that show that there's room for growth?
Well, places like Jerry's were one of the first to have, they put their cider at the top, right? And then it goes beer, lighter to darker as you go down their menu, right? We all know the Jerry's menu. But then you started seeing having 2 ciders at the top. And that was like ammunition to go in other bars that laughed people like Paul and I out saying, cider? We've got a cider. Thanks. They have 50 tap lines. You'd be like, well, did you know that if you put our cider on as a second tap line, we'd outsell half your other lines? BS. All right, well, I'll come back next week, and if it ain't gone, I'll buy it back from you.
You can't do that, Brian.
I was going to say, don't start
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. That's what I wanted to say. And I was broke. Kidding me? I had to.
Most of the data that we see is percentage based, and I would be very interested to see on a volume perspective where Chicago ranks up, and I would be willing to bet that Chicago ranks pretty darn high relative to Portland and New York. Greg, maybe.
So I think, my perspective is, Portland I know I've seen the numbers, the nitty-gritty breakdown. Portland is the highest share of cider versus beer in the country, but it's also not as big a market. I think that Chicago is a advanced market. What makes Chicago very different from Portland is if you go out to Portland, there's really no English cider, French cider, Spanish cider at all. There's like zero. So it's all domestic cider, which is fine, but they don't really understand all the other cultures. We have some of the European ciders here. New York, in many ways, might be the leader because they've got the most, by far the most Spanish cider, probably the most French cider. So in that way, they might be the most sophisticated cider market, not the biggest and not the highest penetration, but they have, you can go in a bar and get a bottle of a Spanish cider or a French cider, which here we're not doing a whole lot of bottle pours yet.
I feel that Chicago is also, because of the fact that we literally almost open up a brewery every single day in the city, in the state, that we are much more educated in the idea of what a craft beverage is. And what people know about the brewing industry is what they want out of the cider industry. And so that's where we're seeing that too. And I agree with Greg in the sense that it might be a more sophisticated palate in New York, because I sold cider there, but I do feel that Chicago is more embracing, more wanting. They demand that we make different styles of ciders because they've already been educated on, like, if we're going to use IPAs like we normally do use as a reference. When IPAs first came out, I remember being at Goose Island and doing a training class on Honkers, IPA, and 312. So this is like 2007. And we're talking about how many people like the IPA? Just a couple of hands came up there. If I did the same tasting now, everyone would be like, oh, I love IPAs. It's only because there was one variety of IPA out there. We didn't start doing these sessionable IPAs. I mean, come on, let's be serious about that. I mean, Anti-Hero is a sessionable IPA as far as I'm concerned. Knowing that I come from Revolution background, everybody likes that. Even if you didn't like IPA, you're like, oh, I could tolerate that one because it's not that bitter. It's not this, it's balanced. So I think that's going to happen in the cider scene, and I think Chicago's ready for that. And I mean, I would not be able to do Eris in Chicago if I didn't think that our market, our people, the education of what we already know to craft and artisanal beverage in general. I mean, we're blowing up in the market for these hard, let's just say it, hard sodas, the root beer, the different things that are happening. I mean, there's so much artisanal going on that there is something there to show that we know what we're talking about.
I feel like there should be a little bit of an applause for Chicago. We've said so many great things about this city.
Let's give it up for Chicago. Let's give it up for us. I'm curious, what is the room for growth, though? What do you think cider will look like in 10 years in this town?
We were talking about this earlier, and we talk about it a lot at Vandermill. And at the beginning of 2015, I very much was, talking with Bob over here, our lovely sales rep for Chicago. And our
Give it up for Bob.
Give it up for Bob. And we very much hoped that 2015 was going to be the year of the second cider handle. And, we've got a lot of new producers that are coming into the market, and we like to
said 2015 was?
Yeah. 2015 was my hope, and I don't
Was
think
it, though?
No, it wasn't. And what we need, we've got a lot of new producers coming into the market, every year as well. And that's obviously due to the growth in the market. And what we try to say over and over is that, guys, I can't go into a bar and sit there and say, hey, you shouldn't have Virtue on draft, you should have Vandermill or any other brand, because there's 20 handles there. And for us to sit there and fight over one piece of the pie when we know that cider can outperform a lot of those other brands, what we really need, there's a lot of real estate for cider. There's a lot of room to grow. We're barely 1% of beer right now, and I don't think most people, certainly most people that I talk to, don't think that over the next 5 years we can't get to 2%.
As a point of reference, in England, it is 13%. They drink more cider in England than they drink lager beer. Now, ale still dominates, but England drinks more cider than the rest of the world put together.
How about everywhere outside of the United States drinks more cider
Basically.
than we do?
I mean, we're still, in America, we're still fighting perceptions of, well, it's a college kid's drink, or, oh my gosh, a woman's drink. Oh, the worst, right? It's sweet. All these perceptions are laid upon the American
Again, that
cider
sweet
scene.
word. I hate that sweet word.
Exist. It does not exist anywhere else in the world. So
let's talk about the market for a minute. In 20, I guess it would be 12, 13, and 14, cider growth was insane. I mean, we're talking like 70, 80, 90% growth. Last year, I think it was about 15. So big dip. I'm curious on everyone's take on.
Can I just say one thing really quick?
They've all talked about this many times, so let me. I'm curious on your takes on
Where
that.
is that information coming from? It's coming from IRI or Nelson.
Right.
Or Nielsen, excuse me. But explain what those are exactly. Where?
Grocery stores.
Well, yeah, okay, go ahead. Someone else explain it for us.
Off premise, which means not this is on premise because you're drinking it on the premises.
So the things that get reported are the scan data from stores, grocery, convenience, and liquor stores. That's what gets reported. The big numbers, and even that, those numbers are not accurate. That they take a sample size, like in Chicago, there are I think 174 Jewel Oscos in Greater Chicago, and they take about 25 of them, and then they extrapolate that out. So we used to look at those numbers at Goose Island, and they would tell us what we were, what our sales were up with Jewel, and we actually knew our sales store by store, and they were always wrong. They were always right directionally, but they were always, not exactly right. So what happened, I think, in 2012 through 15 was you had one producer that had really great access to market and a lot of people on the street and really great wholesaler management. And all the stuff that's like super unsexy to talk about.
Is that Angry Orchard?
Yeah, they were able to grow really rapidly. They also had supply.
So just to dig in, so you're saying that massive growth we saw was basically tied into one company?
Well, one brand got up to about 70% of the market. So they went from like 5% of the market to 70% of the market. And when I get these industry emails every day, and it talks about ciders flattening out, and I email the woman who writes it back, and I said, Angry Orchard's flattening out. I mean, look at the numbers. Dive into the numbers, because when you go out to Portland to the Cider Summit, and you talk to a bunch of small independent cider makers, everyone's doubling. All the small independent guys are doubling. So I think what's happening is cider is growing really fast. It's just, you've got guys who are very small that are, just like craft beer was in the kind of early 90s when, really the same company, Sam Adams was way out in front, and then a company called Pete's Wicked Ale. Anybody remember Pete's Wicked Ale? Pete's Wicked Ale was doing, over 500,000 barrels in 1995. And they grew faster than anybody else, including Sierra and Deschutes and Goose Island, because they had supply. They could make it. And the rest of us, little small breweries, just couldn't even make it to keep up because they contracted. But the reality is, cider is continuing to grow. All the small independent cider makers are continuing to grow. Everybody up on stage, is in limited markets right now, and if we decided to be in 50 states like Angry Orchard is, we couldn't keep up. We'd be growing over 100% too. We'd be probably growing like 700% if we could magically be in 50 states all at the same time like they were. So I think cider's going to continue to grow. I think it's going to continue to expand, and you're going to see,
people drinking cider just like they do beer.
So I don't know the answer to this. Do we know? So if we want to call, well, it's funny because Sam Adams is craft beer, but Angry Orchard is like big cider. So there may be no answer to this question. But what percentage of the cider industry is craft, and what percentage of it is big? Do we know that?
It's tiny.
We all heard about the Ballast Point purchase recently, right? Constellation Brands buys Ballast Point for $1 billion. The entire, okay, that's one beer brand. The entire cider market is not $1 billion. The largest company is Angry Orchard, that's probably $600 million of it. And the rest is like maybe 100, 200 million of everybody else, meaning tiny. So Vanderbilt, they're a large regional player, but nationally, okay, they rank large nationally, but compared to beer, they're like the smallest of smallest breweries. Rich has probably grown every year for the last 4 or 5 years, and still probably, the TTB probably didn't even know it exists.
We redefined micro.
I want to ask, Greg, you sold Bertsche to Anheuser-Busch last year, and I'm curious, what do you think that relationship is going to do for your brand, and where do you see the growth of Bertsche as a result of being part of that family, which is obviously has a lot of muscle?
Sure. Well, in 2011, when we started Bertsche, we had a couple of these friends up here that were making cider, but I didn't even know about them yet. I mean, there was really, you went into a place like Vinny's, and they had 1,000 beers and 5,000 bottles of wine, maybe 500 whiskeys, and like 3 ciders. There was just no cider out there at all. So, and cider was about 0.1% of the beer market. And, and overall, worldwide, in kind of the West, it's about a little over 5%. So if it grew 50 times in America, it would catch up with the rest of the world. So there's a lot of growth there. So, we got in the market. We knew that there was an opportunity for it to grow, and we hired Michelle. Michelle ran sales for us, and we grew, and we saw other people get into the market. But then it started to really take off more than more than our highest hopes could have been. And we started getting calls from all these other states, and a lot of these wholesalers and retailers are guys that I had existing relationships with from my time in Goose Island. So everybody kind of wanted some of our cider out there. So it kind of changed the frame of the opportunity of what we were at in 2011, 12, even 13, to like there's more opportunity out there, and we got to just kind of keep up.
Did that surprise you at all that you had that much opportunity that quickly due to a lot of your relationships?
Well, we were counting on that to happen. We just didn't count on that to happen in like 2 or 3 years. We thought it would take some time, but because of the factors of Angry Orchard getting in, spending a lot of money, pushing it hard, and then the 2 big American brewers, Miller buying Crispin, and then rolling out Smith & Forge.
It might have been Michelle's efforts too, though. She
Mostly Michelle's efforts.
really drove Bertsche for that year. I mean, those 2 years. Her efforts blew up Bertsche overnight. It was amazing to see happen. So.
Well, looking at that too, though, you have to understand, I had a lot of connections also, and the product was great, so it was something that we were doing when that first year that Bertsche came out and Red Streak was there. It was easy. It was very easy to sell, and people were looking for something alternative. People were looking for this cider brand, and when you have wholesalers calling you, it just doesn't mean that the general public's going to learn about it. But this is even bigger, though. It's not just the general public; it's actually the wholesalers that want to get involved. So, that was the nice part, and it was a lot of fun actually, and the connections I had for accounts.
And you were phenomenal. I mean,
Oh,
you're
thank
a great,
you.
great hostess.
Yay, Michelle.
In any event,
Thank you,
you
Rich.
kept us all well.
Michelle does the work of two humans, pretty much.
That's it. I want to get back to the question.
Yeah.
So I mean, Bertsche is a part of a very powerful beverage company now, and I'm curious where you see it going.
So I think what's really changed in the overall marketplace in the last 5 years, but more so in the last 2 or 3 years, is we've really entered the age of provenance. Where stuff comes from matters. You know, there was a time not too long ago, you order your coffee, either coffee or decaf. And then you started ordering it, you know, 2-shot, no foam, whatever. And now you go in and you order it, you know, I'll have the Nicaragua, or I'll have the Ethiopian. You know, now you order it by where it comes from. Wine has always been like that. Cheese has always been like that. But now chocolate is like that.
Is that why you
Coffee's
pushed
like that.
the Michigan thing with your apples to sort of differentiate the product, your product?
Well, I think that is consistent with what a particular consumer and a growing base of consumer wants. You know, you go into a better restaurants in Chicago, and you know they're making their salad, they're getting their greens from work farms. You know, and they're getting their you know, they'll tell you that they're getting their broccoli from Beth at Green Acres. You know, I mean, that didn't happen 5, 6, 7 years ago. So now where stuff comes from is really important. And
So do you see a Michigan cider playing nationally? Do you think that works in all 50 states in 10 years?
well, you know, there is wine made in all 50 states, right?
Well, but it's not distributed. Well, California wine is obviously.
So there's wine made in all 50 states. There are 4 states that sell more wine out of state than in state. So California, Oregon, Washington, and New York sell more wine out of state than in state. The other 46 sell almost all their wine in state. So does anybody have any Missouri wine at home? You know, unless you're from Missouri, no chance, right? But California wine is special because, you know, it's a better place to grow grapes and it's a better place to make wine. We think the Great Lakes, and in particular Michigan, is the best place to grow apples. So if it's the best place to grow apples, then it's certainly the best place to make cider. So we strongly believe that, yes, there is a place for Michigan cider all over the country. So we are actually kind of continuing to brand our stuff and push it even more forward as a Michigan cider.
And then just one more question, sort of following up on that. Again, being part of this very muscular beverage company, I guess you also have the means to distribute, in theory, in all 50 states as the market wants it. So I mean, I
Yes,
guess
well,
based on what I mean,
We do, and the market wants it right now. All of those states want it right now. All those wholesalers call every day and they want it right now, and the chains want it right now, and we can't supply it. So what we're going to do is continue to grow in the states we're in, and
which is how many states about right now?
you know, right now we are in the Great Lakes states, and then a little bit on the East Coast, and a little bit on the West Coast. You know, the places that have a little bit more mature cider markets. And
But
you
it
know,
sounds like you see the avenue for a lot of growth in the future for your company and for cider.
well, yeah, you know, anytime you're really getting into adult beverage, it comes down to, or really just about anything, if you want to sell a lot of it, distribution is kind of everything. You know, if you're in the music business or the shoe business or the beer business or the cider business, you can make a great product, but if you can't get it out to all the points of distribution, you're just not going to sell as much. And we now have a partner that will get us out to more points of distribution than any other partner would.
Do you foresee being in all, 40 states, 50 states?
they would like us to be in 50 states. You know, we'll see how that goes. You know, we're gonna concentrate on not running out of cider in the states we're in right now. We have no plans to open up new states in 2016. So, you know, as we roll into some new packaging, we'll be rolling into 12 ounce for the first time. We'll be in glass.
Mind blown.
Stay in cans. But you know, that'll be good for us, and I think it'll be good for the retailer and good for the cider maker.
Paul, I know you're having a private conversation with Michelle right now. However, Paul, I'm curious what you see as your growth. You're building a big, fancy new production facility in Grand Rapids. You're going to be making cider. You're going to have a brew pub, cider pub. Where do you see your growth going? I mean, Greg, I feel like is sort of locked into right now to what he's doing. Anheuser-Busch is a very powerful machine, obviously. Do you see regional growth for you, national growth? Where do you see your company going in cider, in the cider that you do?
So the building that we built as our cider mill was 5,000 square feet. About half of that was meant to press apples, and the other half was retail. And that's how we started making cider. Was basically, you know, putting plastic totes up in this room, fermenting cider. 2 years ago, I put 3,000 square feet, just another 60 feet on the building, and bought some tanks. We bought a canning line, and I thought, okay, now, you know, we've got great room to grow, and we're going to be in cans, and this is going to be great. About a year into that, we realized that we're stuffed in this space. 3,000 square feet is not that big, so I mean, to be stuffed is not. It's like a big garage, but so we purchased a building, and now we're going from basically 3,000 square feet to 40,000 square feet, and it's a really big jump for us. And where I've seen the business is that as we start to mature in the marketplace, larger retailers become more interested in our product. And back to even the IRI data, we don't even show up on scan data right now because 90% of our business is in independent liquor stores, bars and restaurants. We realized that as some of the larger retailers became interested, that our limited capacity in that space was, we just wouldn't be able to sell product. So I wanted to take a big jump and make sure that if we started to, you know, get some of that interest, that we'd be able to supply product. So right now, with new fermenters that we purchased, we're going to multiply our growth potential by about 5 times. And what we're really focused on is, right now, you can buy our ciders in Michigan, in Illinois, and the lion's share of all of our sales are in Michigan and Illinois. We do pretty decent business in Ohio and Indiana. We're going to open Wisconsin here in another couple weeks. But even with this large expansion of our production capability and having, you know, a big restaurant and tap room, which is going to be fun for people, you know, to come and visit and see what we do, we really want to focus on driving deep into the markets that we're in. And
So that sounds like a regional approach, basically.
yeah, I mean, there's certainly the temptation to open a whole bunch of states because I've now borrowed a ton of money to build this building. And, you know, maybe I will eat crow next year if we do this again.
Thankful, not fail.
Right, that's right. So, but really our intention is to try to be patient, and as we go from market to market is to really sell what we're all about, tell our story, talk about our approach to cider and what we're trying to do, and try to do it really well in each market. So we've always talked about having the epicenter of our business is Chicago and Grand Rapids. And we're going to grow out from there. So we'll see. That's the way I hope that.
I think that's a lot of what Greg was saying, what you're saying, is that there are a lot of different ideas of what success means. And just because you're in new markets doesn't mean you're more successful than another company who serves very well the markets they're in. Rich, are you available anywhere outside of Chicago and suburbs?
No.
Well, and
Redefining micro.
I wanted to ask, Rich, you made a decision to stay very small. Very small. However, he has a permanent handle in Auschwitz. I mean, that's sort of, you could argue, sort of, you know, a pinnacle of the industry, you know? I mean, that's...
I think it depends on where you're interested in and where your focus is. And you know, when we first got in this, it was kind of really interesting because there was, you know, just a very few places in Chicago that had any interest in cider. And you know, to take it bigger takes a lot of capital investment, and I think you also have to lose focus. There's no other way. There's a comment that one of the gentlemen from Wandering Angus made. He said, you know, when I was trying to sell my premium, my reserve cider, the bank wouldn't give me money. When I was trying to sell cider that would turn over in 4 weeks, 6 weeks, I got a loan. And you know, so it depends on what your focus is and what you want to do. And you know, we're content to be where we're at. That's not everybody's.
Well, I think that's the thing too, is that you have to understand, cider making is everyone's got a passion for it, and the passions are different. They're all about what type of apple, what's the apple going to represent? Are we going to go fruit ciders? Are we going to do mass market? Are we going to do local? Are we going to keep it more of a business that's generating enough profitability for us to be happy with what we're doing? This isn't the big leagues on the brewery aspect, like some of the brewers that come into the plate right now. Like, you have some breweries that are coming in and they're like, oh, I'm just going to take over the entire city of Chicago. Well, realistically, how's your product? What are you doing? What's their business background? And I think the people that are sitting up at this panel right now know what their strengths are, know where they want to be in the market, and understand where they want to go in the future. So Chicago being an amazing town for the idea of how to grow cider, I really believe that this town is probably top-notch, one of the top 3 areas, if not one, I'm not going to lie to you, that understands how to grow the idea of the cider industry. But method and technique is really important to us because some of us have been doing it for a very long time. Rich, you've been doing it for a longer time than most of us. And it might have started out as a hobby, let's say, but it's become a business. But it's also a business that he knows he wants to run and where he wants to generate his revenues from and the passion of it. You know, I think we need to understand if we can figure out the business sense of it, that's where it really comes down to where our passions lie. Not all of us have to grow and become this big, when I say that, just a larger company and want to become something that's going to be in all 50 states, or just 5 states, or whatever the case may be. I think that's the difference, and that the general public should understand, is that we all are in it for a certain reason. And some of us are very content with what we do, and we like it. And I mean, I'm going to be outspoken here by saying what I'm saying, but I think technique, to a lot of us.
I went to school for a long time. I have 2 master's degrees. I'm a former academic. I ended up in sales, not in cider sales, but I've never worked for, when I entered the beverage market, I have never worked for a beer company, a wine company. It took me a long time to reconcile that I'm a salesman. But then I realized that sales is nothing more than the transfer of a passion from one person to another. So all you're doing is turning them on to the idea of it. They make the decision. You can't convince anyone to buy anything. They decide to buy it. So if you infect them with that passion that you have, and you're just going to be you, doing what you do, reliably, regardless of the market economics, and do what you do, people will notice. And then it will succeed, or it won't. The market will decide.
I want to ask, does anyone else want to jump in on this rather passionate subject? Because I have one more question, it's for Brian, but if anyone wants to jump in, please.
You know, my data is anecdotal, but I think America has actually embraced cider just because they're interested in it. I think English, it's kind of passed along, kind of, sort of a little bit rediscovered. In Spain, the same. And where my parents came from in Germany, cider was something every farmer had in his cellar. But if I talk to my nephews, they think we're friggin' nuts. My son and Eric, we go to Germany, we say we want to drink a cider, and he said, shit, it's not available. You can't buy it. You got to go to some farmer to buy it. So I think what's interesting, the statistics aside, I think in America there's a genuine interest in it, and I think it'll grow just like you find German, Norwegian, Swedish kids coming over here to learn how to do microbrew because it wasn't available in Europe in the 90s, so I think in a lot of ways I think there is an appreciation and a discovery aspect in America that's happening that's not happening in other places. And by the way, at these cider cons, we got guys coming from Germany and other countries going, hey, what's going on here in America? Because they want to learn, copy, improve, and do the same thing there.
Yeah, I want to, real briefly, I think what is great about the American market right now for cider is that we're not mired by tradition. And as much as we can go to Spain and England and we can really put a high value on what those folks have been doing for a lot of years, and we can appreciate what they're doing, I see and I hear those folks looking at this market saying, holy crap, you guys can do anything you want, and there are no boundaries, and there are no rules, and it's growing faster than it is anywhere in the world.
Well, that sort of echoes American craft beer also, right?
Yeah.
Which is cool.
Innovation. Innovation. I mean, that's what America's all about, right? We wanted to be different.
We left the old world to free ourselves from the constrictions of religious and political indoctrination. How dare we let anyone tell us what we want to do with what we drink?
USA.
And we will make America great again.
USA. USA.
Okay, never mind. So, last question, and then hopefully some questions from you guys. Brian, so you have what, 20 cider taps?
So we have 18 ciders on
18
draft.
cider
Well, okay, I shouldn't lie. 17 ciders on draft. One, I turned into a mead tap handle, right? Session mead. But then we also have, a cider so 2015. When's the next mead bar opening? Damn it!
Greg's out of here. Thank you, Greg.
Seriously.
Everyone, a round of applause for Greg.
Greg Hall.
So, if there are questions for Greg, hopefully he'll come back. But Brian, what I want to know is you've got 18 cider taps. A lot of people think of cider as either monolithic or there's dry and there's sweet. I'm wondering what you look for to create variety and to curate those 18 taps.
So I do organize my draft and bottle list geographically, not because I think all French cider tastes the same or English cider tastes the same. Again, to emphasize it is an agricultural product. It comes from somewhere. I wanted to tell the story. I am a former archivist, and archivists organize their files based on the idea of provenance, where a record comes from. Not necessarily who creates it, but where the record came from and how they kept the records. So when you tell the story of where it comes from, you say who made it, the type of fruit it was made from, and maybe some of the ideas that informed them. So generally on tap, it's America, France, England, Spain, and then I have a section on the menu that says fruit, spice, and everything nice. Meaning, you want to throw strawberries in your cider? Cool. Cherry? Cool. Cinnamon? Right on. Hop cider, aged in gin barrels for 6 months. Yeah. Pinot Noir grapes, imperial ciders. You know, let's get creative. So the idea is to create sort of a representative walk through the spectrum of what's happening on cider. We had a cold brew coffee cider on when we opened. People would say, that's insane. Coffee's beer, it makes sense. Coffee and cider can't taste good. Coffee's highly acidic, cider's highly acidic. They play very well together. there's a lot of interesting things happening in cider, and I think that's the challenge or the joy of it, is that people expect to come in and be like, cider, it's all right. But it kind of been there, done that. You ask someone, do you like cider? No. Say why. It's too sweet. How many ciders have they tasted? I could give them a cider that would strip paint from the wall. It would be so dry. And so I don't buy that. I think that it's a cop-out. They're like, I've tasted it, I don't like it. Whereas if you're going to a craft beer bar, you have a crazy Belgian beer, it's got funky yeast, and you don't like it, you wouldn't slam your glass down and walk out of the bar saying, I don't like beer. You say, I just got to try another beer. Same thing is true in cider. If you don't like it, guess what? We've got another one for you. I mean, there's going to be no end to the parade of ciders that we put on over there. There's really no limit.
Do you have any permanent handles, or are you turning over all?
No, we're turning over everything. I mean, we might back something up because a lot of our cocktails are created based on what's pouring on draft. So I might buy 2 kegs of one kind of cider so I can keep it on for a week so that my bartenders don't have to relearn a cocktail every 3 days. Yes, I might keep some things for a week or 2, but things will rotate, things will change. I will try and keep a good representation. I have a cider from Left Foot Charlie. It's a great winemaker in Michigan, Traverse City area. Wine Spectator named him one of the top 10 Rieslings in America last year. And yet he makes great cider. And he's got a cinnamon girl cider. A lot of cinnamon. Probably more cinnamon than totally roasted cider. But I'm not going to put totally roasted on cider on draft, even though I have it in my cooler right now, because I'm going to wait until Left Foot Charlie's done. And then we'll put the totally roasted on so you have a cinnamon cider alternative. Right? I'm not going to hit you with 5 cinnamons, 5 gingers, or be like Portland and give you 70% IPAs. It's going to be well-rounded.
So I have to ask you, so your theory of Northman is going to be the lines kind of reflect the spice or fruit that the ciders reflect?
Yeah, it will.
I'm trying to understand exactly what you just said.
Think of it like Lollapalooza. A bunch of different stages for a bunch of different bands, sold out. I mean a bunch of different places to perform and create and see different types of music and beverages. One tap is playing this kind, one tap is playing the other, and you can go and visit each. Print this. Here's the controversy. And I don't know, I mean, you guys, I hope you're all getting beers and ciders the way we are. I hope you're not sitting there politely and, because we're going a little bit long, but here's the thing. Scandal alert, I don't offer flights on draft, nor do I offer tasters.
Let's just dive into this real quickly. No tasters? That's ridiculous.
Right? Craft beer culture in Chicago, you go in, what do you got on draft? Oh, can I have a taste of that? Sure. Some bars will say, sure, we offer $1 tasters because they want to preserve their margins. The amount of money that I pay for these kegs to be shipped over from Europe is insane.
So what if someone orders a cider and they don't like it?
You're an adult. You made a decision.
Okay, that's a snappy line, but it's an uninformed decision, and it's arguably the bar's job to help inform its customers.
That's why
before
I'm
they
there.
spend $7 on a glass of a liquid they never
Which is
had
why
before.
we've taken such expert care to create.
Hey, where's the applause for that? I'm saving you $7.
I think ultimately the reason why, a large part of the reason why cider has done so well and why craft beer has done so well is that it is a relatively small investment in a glass of liquid.
Dude, when I see someone struggling at a menu, I just don't know what to get. Man, I could get this, and they're like 10 minutes looking at a menu. You're gonna piss it out in 2 hours, man. It's not real estate.
All right, maybe we should
All right, we're moving on to the question and
next
answer part of the evening. Thank you everyone for your passion and your knowledge. Brian, please reconsider the case.
Censor.
Any questions from this man?
So in December they passed the new cider act, which basically changes the laws of cider. Maybe you could explain that to the general and everybody else, and how is that going to affect the business and what's that the benefit for us to see?
Great question, and I'd like to thank you for all your visits to Fenville. So, yeah, the Cider Act, I for one didn't think it would run through this quick. The Cider Act got basically tied to an appropriations bill, and the Cider Act will allow cider makers in the U.S. to increase two things: the amount of alcohol in the cider and the amount of CO2 in the cider, without raising the tax point. So it's it's far more complicated than that. But what will happen is a lot of the ciders that you know and love, you will have a little bit more alcohol. Some will have more alcohol, some won't, and most of them will probably have considerably more CO2. So those things are good.
The root of that problem was that by a federal definition of cider was that it was no more than 7% alcohol, that it was not carbonated, it was still, and that it could have no other types of fruit included with it. And you might think, well, okay, fine, what's the big deal? The problem is that we have American cider producers that have apples that will naturally ferment cider to above 7% alcohol, and they were not able to call it cider. They had to call it a apple wine. Also, I think most of us and most of the American market assumes that cider is a carbonated beverage, not a still beverage. And that was the real driving point for the act, was the fact that if you artificially carbonate cider to a certain level of CO2, you were taxed like champagne. And that took the tax from, say, 20 cents a gallon to $3.40 a gallon. So you would have, math, you'd have somewhere around $50 of federal tax per keg of cider, which, obviously is a real problem. So,
and realizing that your Belgium, some of your Belgian lambics and have is almost more carbonation than champagne, and they're paying a beer tax.
yeah, it was basically just writing the tax regulation to what is more appropriate to.
Wait, you just said the buzzkill words, tax regulation. We got to move on. Next question. Sir.
We're currently shopping for some land in western Michigan where you start a permaculture orchard. What kind of apples would be in your dream orchard?
What kind of apples would be in your dream orchard? I like that.
So for 5 years, I've been bugging our growers in West Michigan to put fruit in, and well, at least 5 years. And since I've been in this business, the big chicken and egg is, hey, we're cider makers and we want different kinds of apples. And the growers say, great, what kind of apples do you want? And we say, we don't really know. And we know what types of varieties that, produce a certain character in other countries, but we don't really know how that's going to be, if it's going to be feasible at all in the climate that we have. So for a decade, there's been this problem of we want different and we don't know what we want. So
I like Red Street.
we
Somerset Red Street.
We're working with our grower, and we're growing things like Davenette, which is a bittersweet. If you were to categorize anything, I would say what we're lacking is bittersweets. So find any bittersweet apple, figure out if you can grow it, and then that's what we're ultimately looking for. There's a small producer in Michigan, or a small orchardist that has Ashmead's kernel. Unbelievable apple. So there are a few varieties, but specifically it's bittersweets that we're looking for.
What's this one you just mentioned, Greg? Red Street?
Somerset Red Street.
Somerset Red Street, which was actually the first apple that was grown specifically for cider. And it's a wonderful apple. It's a bittersweet, it's got a nice aroma, really good tannin, good acid.
Does it taste good to bite into? from the grocery store?
Not, well, they don't sell them in the grocery store. I like it, but I'm odd.
The farmers call these apple varieties spitters because they would bite into them just to evaluate, and they would spit them back out. You would get an idea of texture and whatnot, but you'd mostly be getting
But
tannin.
it makes good cider.
Well,
That's
the
a-
reason Greg can say that he likes these apples is because he's looking at it from a vision of what it can create in a cider. You wouldn't want to choose some of these apples as, hey, I'm going to sit down for breakfast and I'm going to have something delicious and give me this apple to bite. Well, I don't know. I shouldn't put words in your mouth. Maybe you do want to do that, but I think that that's part of it, is that these are very bitter, often very dry. The yield is another big consideration if you're going to consider growing. We've had Ashmead's kernel, for example. You have half the yield of what you would out of a traditional culinary variety or less. So the economics are really,
I'd be happy to
and
get
whether or
you
not they produce
a list of apple varieties. I mean, really what I'd like is a range of English bittersweets and French bittersweets. That's what I'd like the most.
Next question. Anybody? Oh, come on. There were a bunch of hands before. Both of you in whatever order.
Ladies.
Lady in front.
So I had a question about the gluten-free market and how that's affected you guys. Have you seen a big boom of sales since the market was turning more towards gluten-free? I mean, is this question sort of just assumed that this happened in the cider market?
That's a really great question, and I believe that's something that none of us, at least I didn't really put a whole lot of faith in gluten-free being part of the appeal of cider. But as we've done a little more research on it, and we've had other people do some research and share it with us, the gluten-free food market is a shift, not a trend. We're looking at like 16, 17 straight years of 20 to 50% growth in gluten-free foods. So it's a shift. It's a new, it's the new normal now. And those people don't have as many options when it comes to drinking something nice and refreshing. We know that anything distilled is gluten-free, but we're not going to tell you guys that because people freak out and they think distilled vodka, it's got wheat in it, it's not gluten-free.
Still not sure if science is real.
But yeah, but as far as a nice cold pint, cider is unique in that it's gluten-free.
Have you been able to market
part of it? We will never market it as specifically as being gluten-free as a dietary supplement. That's not what we're doing.
The scary part is, people ask you if it's gluten-free, and then you ask, is the yeast that you're using, and yeast is dry yeast, it's not just pure yeast, is that if you have some issues with sulfides or something, and now you put a yeast hulls in there, it's gluten-free, so it becomes kind of like it's a touchy subject in terms of, because some people actually do have a real reaction to gluten, and some people are just doing it for dietary reasons. It sounds good. So I think it's a good question, but honesty in the labeling.
All right, the woman behind the woman who just asked a question.
Greg, you made a cider mark about manure influencing outcome. Made me think of the British style of harvesting where it falls from a tree and lays around the muck, which I imagine influences the wild yeast. I wondered if you guys care about your method of harvesting. Are you playing with that? How do you harvest? Does it matter?
Do you have animals in your orchard?
Really great question. So if you go to England, France, or Spain, the three big, with apologies to Germany and Austria, the three biggest cider cultures in Europe, all the orchards are multi-purpose. They all are pastures, anywhere from 8 to 10 months of the year. So the animals are grazing under the trees, and then when the fruit starts to drop, they get the animals out of there, and all the fruit is drops. They do not pick apples off trees to make cider. in England, France, or Spain, ever. You never do it. In America, it's against the law to let apples drop and then use them. So the FDA doesn't let us do that. Don't tell the FDA about like lettuce and onions and carrots, because we might not be able to eat that anymore either. They're always in dirt. But yeah, so that's a great question. So how do we, as a cider maker, like if we're influenced by European ciders, so what we do, we actually do something about that. In the fall, we get our apples in, and we let them set out on our dock or out in our field before we press them and let them start to sweat and soften up a little bit. So we prefer our apples to be not fresh, not ripe, but overripe before we press them. And then we get a little more character out of the apple that way, and a little more complexity, we believe. So in the fall, all our apples spend a little time outside before they get pressed and dry out. And that's not quite the same as being, drops, but it's closer than going straight off the tree.
Sir?
So the panelists discussed many points of comparison between craft beer and craft cider, but there's one point that I would love to hear your opinion on, and that relates to processing. So the cost of energy, the cost of water, is not going to decrease with time, it's going to increase. So my question to you is, does that offer a competitive advantage to craft cider makers compared to craft beer makers on a per barrel basis?
Because 90% of beer is water. Maybe. I mean, when people, Michigan makes some of the best beer in America, and they're like, oh, I love Michigan beer, and a lot of it is only
Chicago beer.
Hey, me too. But most of Michigan, so we're comparing Michigan cider versus Michigan beer, most of what's local about Michigan beer is the water. The hops are coming from somewhere else, the grains are coming from somewhere else. I mean, Michigan apples are rained on in Michigan, picked by people who live in Michigan, produced and crushed by people who live in Michigan. It's very local. And yet, well, that might be true too, or they might have, well, that's not always true.
No.
And God bless them for being a part of it, because in the last couple harvests we had, there have been difficulties in getting all of the harvest in. So it's an agricultural product, and so yes, all of those price factors come into play.
I think that I think the economies of the beer versus apples operate independently. I like to often tease some of my brewing friends and saying, boy, it sure would be nice to turn on the faucet today. But every drop that we put in a can or keg has to be squeezed from a piece of fruit. Now, that's a fun thing for me to say, but the reality of it is that those economics end up, I think, completely independent, and I personally wouldn't see that water is going to become more expensive than pressing juice out.
Maybe not in the Great Lakes, but elsewhere, perhaps. If the wars, Paul Simon, our esteemed senator of Illinois, God rest his soul, wrote a book, and it was said if the wars of the 20th century were fought over oil, the wars of the 21st will be fought over water. So water, we're blessed with water. Let's not take it for granted.
Who else? Any more questions out there? There's one.
Long-time listener, first-time caller. So there's obviously a huge disparity in the cost for a bottle of wine versus a bottle of cider. How different are the processes, and are the prices of wine artificially high or the prices artificially low? Are they going to change?
I don't think wine is. We live in the great experiment of capitalism here. So the prices are where they should be. Especially in a town like Chicago, which kind of invented capitalism and 20th century economic thought. So the price of wine is what what people will pay for it. And right now, wine is more rare and more scarce and more precious than cider. Does it cost more to produce it? I don't know. Not a whole lot more, probably. Pretty similar. As Paul was saying, we get all of our water out of apples, and we're paying anywhere from 8 cents a pound to 45 cents a pound for apples, and therefore water. There's no one in the world that's paying 45 cents a pound for water, besides maybe some wine makers and some cider makers. So yeah, we pay an extraordinarily high amount for our water, and I believe that as wines have become more differentiated, the same thing will happen with cider. It's not going to happen right away, but there will be ciders out there that are a lot more precious than the ones you find at a typical sports bar right now. So will there be a $50 bottle of cider and a $100 bottle of cider? I don't know why there wouldn't be.
I mean, our most expensive bottle at the Northman is $45.
What is it?
It is sea cider Prohibition, hand pressed in rack and cloth, aged in bourbon barrels. It's like 12% ABV.
Where's it made?
It's British Columbia.
Is it good?
It's excellent. Okay. We sell it by the glass.
Can I get a taste?
You don't have to dive in.
Can I just get a little taste?
No taste.
No taste. Buy it by the glass.
If there's one more question, just to wrap this up. One more question? Oh, there's one more question.
Can I ask a second one if no one has
Go
a
for it.
question? Can you just talk about storing cider at home? Should it be at the same temperature as wine? How long can you keep it?
How do you store cider at home?
Great question. So, when I was a veteran brewer and I would visit breweries, I would ask them all sorts of technical questions. And I traveled all over the world visiting breweries and asking them, all sorts of fancy-ass questions about how they made the beer. And then when I started visiting cider makers and asking them questions that weren't even so fancy, nobody had answers at all. So there's generally, cider's been made, culturally it's been made by families and family farms that have passed down their traditions from generation to generation. So technology is very low in cider making. So with that doesn't really answer your question. What answers your question is cider does not have the components that stale up like beer does. So I've had 7, 8, 9-year-old cider from France and 3, 4, 5-year-old cider from England that tastes great, tastes just fine. So I would keep it in a cool, dry place and dark, and that's about it.
So it doesn't have to be refrigerated. You can put it in
You can make it cold, you can then get it warm again, and then get it cold again. It's not like
or
beer.
stick it in the back of a closet. That's not
You take care of it like wine, because
It's forgiving, is what I mean to say.
It also very much depends on the cider you're talking about.
Yes, highly tannic cider with all those properties that Paul was talking about, it's gonna last. It's not wine, it's not gonna last for decades, for 5 years, 8 years. It's also not light struck the way that beer is.
Certainly also age does not necessarily mean quality.
Exactly.
Just like in wine, if it's old, it doesn't necessarily mean it's better. It might be terrible. So we like to tell people, if you buy our product, we prefer if you just drink it so that you can go back and buy some more.
And on that note, thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Thanks for being here.
What else did you try?
Good job, guys.
for coming, everyone. If you want to come, we have another event next Tuesday. It's the third year we've done Ciders and Sliders with Sci-Fi Oh My. And we'll have all the ciders that are on tonight and some more. And we're going to watch weird science fiction movies and eat very small sandwiches. Thanks for coming.
Hey, I want to thank Jerry for giving us more. Thanks, Josh Noel, for being our moderator. We are one of the few cities that has a full-time drinks journalist. So we're very lucky here in Chicago.
Thanks to Jerry's and Trey Elder for hosting us. You guys are amazing. Thank you for everything you do.
And Paul will be hanging out signing autographs. So see you at the bar.
Yeah, we're all going to be hanging out, drinking more cider, and maybe some shots of whiskey or something if you want to join us in the bar.